A few months ago, a good friend of mine dropped me a message to say that his wife was doing a bit of clearing out and she found her childhood Sega Game Gear. Now, they did try to put some batteries in this, but no surprises, it didn't work. As I'm sure you know, these things are renowned for having leaking capacitors, causing all sorts of mayhem on the boards in here. So they offered it up to me to see if I could fix it, but there's also a bag of goodies with it. So let's take a look in there, and then let's see if we can get this sorted. So along with the Game Gear, we have a power supply. We have the old battery pack. I'm sure this has long since died, and I'm not sure we will be able to do anything with it, but we'll open it up and take a look anyway. There are a pile of games. Sonic Chaos, Sega Game Pack 4-in-1, another copy of Sonic Chaos, Tailspin, Sonic 2, James Pond 2, Chuck Rock, Donald Duck, and the Jungle Book. And then beyond that, well, we have one capacitor kit that I'm adding into the mix, and one other bag of goodies. But before we even start to think about this, we need to make this work. So I think it only right that we give it a test. Now, it did say to me that this doesn't work. We can already see evidence of battery corrosion in here. Wasn't uncommon for batteries to be left in these, and AA batteries, after a while, they do like to leak and cause all sorts of problems. But despite the fact that they obviously have leaked in here before, there's no real rust, and it looks as if they've had a go at cleaning the contacts here. But let's give it a go. 6 AA's. Back in the early 90s, that was quite an expensive luxury. All those batteries, and with the backlit LCD screen in here, well, 6 AA's didn't last that long. And so, yeah, there is absolutely nothing happening. No signs of life whatsoever. Now, I don't have a game in, but even without that, we should get at least a power LED and a white screen, but nothing is happening. But that's not really surprising, is it? Because, as I said, the caps in these love to leak and wreak all sorts of havoc. So how do we get in? Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Phillips head screws, and then 1 game bit. The 6 screws, they come out easily enough, but to get this thing out, we need a game bit. That's in here, along with the capacitors. There's the game bit itself. I got this kit from Digital Delights on eBay. I'll leave a link in the video's description to his shop. But they sell capacitor kits for any amount of different retro systems, and they're certainly not hard to pay. This kit was only $7.49. Instructions, we will need those later to figure out what capacitors go where, but the game bit, that fits over there, and then I need something to turn it with. It should fit into this tool. It does. And then we can take that game bit out. Just in case you would be tempted, don't try to force that out with like a pair of pliers or something. If you apply too much pressure at this point here, you risk damaging the LCD. And trust me, I am talking from experience there, because me in my youth, I thought I was being smart. I tried to open up my Game Gear for a look, and I cracked the screen. Now, there's a few wires that join the top and bottom sections. Looks as if these 2 wires here will disconnect at this side. And then there's one more here as well. Disconnects on this side. I think that's the sound board, and that is the power board. And I was just about to say, it doesn't actually look too bad in terms of capacitor leakage, but yeah, it's bad enough, isn't it? Look at the gunk in there that we're going to have to try and clean up. Very similar story on the sound board. Those caps have obviously leaked, left quite a mess in there. The main PCB itself though, it looks like it's mostly got away with it. Now they definitely have leaked. You can see a bit of corrosion on the likes of those pads there. But I don't think this is too bad. I have seen some horror stories of Game Gears inside. But I'm hopeful here that a simple recap and a bit of a reflow on the likes of that power board and soundboard where the corrosion is, I would hope that would be enough to get this thing up and running again. Now we do need to get the PCBs out of it, but it is all just Phillips head screws, so this should come apart easily enough. I'm just going to take everything out, all the screws out, and then hopefully this just lifts out. And there is our Game Gear. It all comes out in one lump. We can't really disconnect the screen because it's attached here, its ribbon is attached here. There's the reason the batteries never last. The compact fluorescent backlight, that thing just chews through the batteries. And then it's just a matter of removing all those capacitors. Well, I need to get the boards out of the other half of the case, which is easier said than done. What's holding this in? Looks like this black bit of plastic here. It looks like that will have to come off. In fact, you know what that's doing? If I can take this off. There it goes. It's not just a black bit of plastic. That is the battery contacts. And to get the soundboard out, it looks like we need to remove this bit of shielding as well. And there's just two screws holding the soundboard itself in. And there it is. Black screw goes into the gold hole. Just remember that. Now because that is just a bare LCD sitting there, you know, there's nothing protecting it at the minute. And we are going to have to work with this thing face down. I'm just going to cut up a bit of this foam to try and protect it. So we can set that on there and use a bit of tape to hold it down. That'll hopefully just mean when we're working on it like that, we shouldn't damage anything. So let's see about getting these old capacitors off. So these are surface mount capacitors, but they're not SMD caps like these things. These would more sort of remind you of like through-hole caps that are installed surface mount. Both the pads are on the one side of it, positive and negative. They are electrolytic caps. And other than in a Sega Game Gear, I've never seen this style of capacitor, this sort of package of capacitor anywhere else. So they're soldered on that side, but on this side, Sega decided to glue them down. So we do need to break that glue off first. It should come away easy enough. Oh, well. The actual plastic just broke, revealing the capacitor inside, which actually sort of confirms what I'm talking about. It looks like a through-hole capacitor just inside that plastic box that is surface mounted. Well, I can't get the glue to let go there, but at least with the plastic broken, should be able to desolder it. I was only using the pliers here to try and free the capacitor from the PCB. From the glue's point of view, I would never try to remove these things just with brute force. But with both the legs on one side like that, we should be able just to heat that. And that lifts away easy enough. Sorry for the fan noise, but I need something here because these have obviously leaked rather severely. The smell of electrolytic is very potent. But hopefully you can see that these do come off easily enough. So I'm just going to continue removing them. and then we can have a think about cleaning up the mess. Last one, but this one is going to be tricky. I can't just jam the soldering iron in there or it's going to melt this thing. Potentially even melt that connector there. So what I'm going to try and do is lever this one off the board and then snip the legs of it. That came up easily enough. Can I get my cutters in? It's one leg cut. Two leg cut. And then with that out of the way, we can just go over the pads and remove what's left of the leg. A little bit of wick then will hopefully suck up whatever solder is left. And then this whole board is getting one very thorough bath in IPA. There are a couple of vias here that were close to those capacitors. There's one there, for example. And that one in particular is a bit black. So I think what we'll do is just double check continuity from there through to the other side of the board. It wouldn't be the first time that a leaking capacitor has broken continuity through something like that. So while we're removing capacitors, we may as well just pull the caps off the power board and the sound board as well. But I'm just noticing that I think I might have ordered the wrong cap kit. Because we do have the caps for the main board. Got the caps here for the power board. But these are the ones that were included for the sound board. Now the ones for the main board, we are replacing those original surface mounted caps with through-hole parts, but we are mounting these surface. I'll talk a bit more about that later. These ones though, I would have expected the cap kit to come with replacement surface mount cans like these and not through-hole parts. So maybe there is a different version of the soundboard that uses through-hole capacitors, but I would certainly prefer not to put this type of cap on here. I would rather replace it with the original can type like these. Now I think I do have spares for these in stock, but what I'm going to do is just take a photo of that first. Just take this on my phone so that I have a record of where all those caps go. And look at that, I just noticed there I have a new comment on my last video about the Macintosh 2CI. I normally wouldn't mention something like this in a video, but I think that's quite interesting, isn't it? In its heyday, the 2CI was a great computer, but times have changed, to say the least. Why bother? It's amazing how many times that comes up. Why bother? People seem to ask that all the time. Well, why not is pretty much the only answer that I can ever give. It is just a hobby after all. People collect all sorts of different things, don't they? Some people collect films, some collect music, some people collect stamps. I like to collect vintage computers and consoles. And part of the fun of that for me is the maintenance on them. I think this one has definitely leaked because it is putting up quite the fight. Yep, I would say that one has definitely leaked, as has that big one. You can see quite a bit of gunk left behind on the board there. Now, as for the sound board, well, my usual method of removing these things is hot air. But there's an awful lot of plastic around here. So I'm of two minds what to do here. I could try and cut these off. You see loads of people doing it that way, although I'm really not a fan of doing it. Given the amount of electrolytic that has spilt here, I mean, you can clearly see how green the pads are around there. But that spilt electrolytic will eat its way into the PCB and it will weaken the pads that these capacitors are attached to. If I try to twist these off, or even try to cut these off, that is applying quite a bit of mechanical force onto those pads, and there is a good chance of lifting them. So while it may give me a bit more work, what I'm going to do is remove these two connectors and the audio jack. The audio jack inside is a bit corroded anyway, so this could use a bath and a bit of white vinegar and a bit of IPA to help that out. So probably want to take that off anyway. And if it's only a matter then of removing those two, at least that should, in theory, let me remove these caps with hot air without causing any damage. With all that off then, it's just going to be my usual sort of approach. So I'm going to put a bit of flux on these points. Try and get a little bit of fresh solder mixed in with the corroded solder. Hardly any new solder took to that, but let's just see how it goes. Let's see if we can get these off with hot air. Now, I do need to be careful here because there are a few other small SMD components close to those capacitors. They're too close to cover with some of the tape. You can see I've covered the volume wheel there with the tape. So just need to be careful that I don't blow those other components out of place. In fact, what I'm going to do is turn down the airspeed a bit. That should help just keep everything in its correct place. Whoop! It just popped as it came off. Obviously because as I'm doing this, whatever electrolytic is left in them is essentially boiling inside. And there we are. 5 capacitors removed with 0 damage to this PCB, and that is the main thing I wanted to achieve. Yes, it does look an absolute mess, but it should clean up okay with a bit of IPA. And there we have it. After one quick bath, we have one nice clean PCB now, ready to accept the new capacitors. While I was at it, I just went around and reflowed all those small surface mount components. There was a bit of corrosion on all of those, but a little bit of flux, some fresh solder, and they come up like new. In fact, speaking of which, I need to tackle this mess, and I'm just going to really do it the same way. So, a lot of flux. And let's see if we can get a bit of fresh solder to flow into this. That's not came up too bad there, I don't think. Let's see what it cleans up like. And yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Bit too much solder on one of the legs of that I see there, but I'll sort that out in a minute. And so one PCB almost ready to go. Cleaned up okay, but there is some damage on it. Just here where that large capacitor was. That pad there, well, both of them actually, both of them are damaged, but this one, it has a trace on this side coming up here going to one of the battery terminals, I think. But as you can see, most of that pad there is missing, and you'll maybe not be able to see it on the video, but I'm pretty sure the plating that goes through the via, through the hole to connect to the other side, I'm pretty sure it is missing as well. So we need to scratch off a bit of the solder mask here, and we'll need to run a wire from here through the board to connect to the other side. You can see there where I have exposed the copper on that trace coming along to that pad. I did check it with the multimeter. There is no continuity through the board to the other side. So despite the fact that this did look all leaky and crusty and horrible, I think this break here is probably the main reason why we were seeing absolutely no signs of life whatsoever when we tried to power it up earlier. But I've got a bit of wire here that I have stripped back, so I'm going to feed that through from the other side. Then we'll bend that down onto the copper that I have exposed. We'll hit it with a little bit of flux and then see about soldering it in place. Just like that. That is capacitor C13. If we refer to the instructions, C13, 820 UF 6.3 volt. There's our power board caps. There's the new 820 6.3 volt. Looking at the markings on the silk screen, the side of the capacitor shown here with the solid white section, that is the ground. On the other side, you might be able to see just a little plus symbol there. On the cap itself, the side with the stripe, or with the short leg, that's the ground, the long leg is the positive. So it's a little tight to get that through the hole because we have that wire in there as well now. But it just about fits. That new cap is actually a bit smaller than the old one. But nothing wrong with that. Capacitors do seem to have got slightly smaller over the years. It is the correct capacitance value. But with that in there, we can trim that all down a bit. And then solder it up. For the soundboard then, I did find replacement surface mount capacitors. We need 3 100 UF and 2 47s. Now the original parts were 6.3 volt and 4 volt, but the ones I'm using as replacement here are all 16 volt. The capacitance value needs to be the same, the voltage can be higher, so these will be fine. Now just to stop this dancing about while I'm trying to do the soldering, I'm going to mount it on a bit of blue tack. The replacement 47s that I'm using here are slightly too big. They are slightly bigger than the old ones, although they do still fit on the pads. They just sort of completely cover the pads. So I'm going to hit one side of these with a bit of fresh solder first of all. And we'll grab the cap in the tweezers and see about getting this set into place. You can just about see a little bit of the pad on this side. As I said, these caps are probably just a little too big, but hopefully there's enough of it showing there that I can flow some solder onto it. And yeah, that seems to be stuck down okay. Well, there's the 5 new capacitors on the soundboard. Some of them were a little bit tricky, but they're all on there now. And I think they're all connected up okay. Need to put the 2 connector blocks back on, and of course the audio jack. But as I was saying, this thing is looking a bit crusty inside, so that's some white vinegar. Give it a bit of a bath in there while we're working on the rest of it. Right, soundboard's finished, all barring that jack, which is in there getting a bath in vinegar at the minute, just to try and eat away any of that corrosion. Don't want to leave it in there too long, but while we're waiting for that, I think we could fit the new capacitors to the main PCB. And as I said earlier, those new capacitors are going to be these through-hole electrolytics. We're going to cut these down to size and mount them onto this. And while it won't be the most pretty thing to look at, well, I am of the firm belief it is the correct way to do it, certainly in a Sega Game Gear. You can't get new surface mount caps in the same package as those which we removed. These things, or if you can, I have certainly never seen them. And while you do see other people fitting surface mount ceramic capacitors in place of the original electrolytics, Well, I'm just not convinced that's such a good idea, really. Now, I would never claim to be an expert on such things, but do you know who was an expert on it? The guys who designed this board, the Sega engineers. And there are any amount of other ceramic capacitors on here. There's 2 there, for example. And so if ceramics were suitable for the whole PCB, why did they fit electrolytics? So I have heard some people claim that if you fit ceramics on this, it could introduce noise into the audio circuit. It can cause ripple current on the PCB that has potential to damage the original custom chips. One thing to bear in mind, if your new ceramic fails, well, they tend to fail as a short, whereas anytime I've seen an electrolytic fail, it fails open. So if it does fail to a short, potential to damage some other component. But more so for me, as I said, Sega intended this board to have electrolytics on it, and so that is what I'm going to fit. Now, I did toy with the idea of trying to find small surface mount cans like these that would do all those positions, and we could maybe fit them. That one would have certainly fitted on there, for example, but I don't think you'd be able to fit them to the likes of that position there. So while we could use those cans in some areas and then use the through-hole parts cut down in others, I think it would be easier just to use the ones we got in the kit, and we'll install these across the board. So capacitor C1, that's a good a place to start as any. There are 2 different versions of the Game Gear PCB. There's one with the single ASIC, which is the same as our board. There's another one that has 2 such chips on it. So we are working to this one here. Capacitor C1, 33 UF 16 volt. So we'll mount that on the board, something like that. But obviously I need to cut these legs down to size. So let's bend them down first of all, sort of like that. Trim them about there, I think. Now I can mount that on there. Need to open those legs out a bit more. And that is one done. All the new capacitors are on. Most of them went on in the same orientation as those that came off. Just a couple of them had to change slightly. That one there has been flipped over just because those sort of gold looking points there are standoffs on the case that come down and rest against those. So that one had to be flipped over this way to avoid that. This one here had to sort of go on at a bit of a funny angle just to make it fit. But all the rest, they all went on fine. The audio jack is back on the audio PCB now. That got us bath in white vinegar for about half an hour. Then equally, same again in IPA. And it came out looking like new. There are no signs of corrosion on it anywhere. But it's all hooked up because it's time to test it. One thing I discovered, by the way, I took the 4 screws out at those points. You don't need to take them out. And in fact, if you're working on a Game Gear, don't take those out because all they're doing is holding the screen, this white plastic bit, all they're doing is holding that against the PCB. So don't do like I did. You don't need to take those out. But one thing we do need to put in is a game, Sonic Chaos. We're going to be powering it from the mains adapter that came with it. I have tested it. It's putting out about 13 volt, but it should be okay. And so let's see what it does. I can see the backlight on. And there is our game. It's running. And that screen doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's a Sega Game Gear screen. How good can it really be? But it looks fine. There's no dead lines in it or anything. There is a distinct lack of audio though. And just a noise coming out of the speaker. That's the volume at max there. and just noise coming out of this. You know what it could be? There's a switch inside this jack which basically tells the Game Gear that you've plugged in a set of headphones, rerouting the audio to the headphone jack rather than the speaker. And if that switch has maybe got corroded, we did see some corrosion in there, if that has got corroded, could it be stuck on, and could the audio be permanently stuck coming out of here rather than the speaker? Just plug in a set of headphones, and no, just the same noise coming out of there. So we've got another problem to fix. So I've got my own Game Gear here, and don't look too closely at the soldering in here. This was actually the first ever soldering job I ever undertook, and let's just say that needs done again, because that is abysmal. But I do know this machine works, so we'll stick our cartridge in there. I've disconnected its soundboard. Let's hook it up to the soundboard of our other Game Gear that we're working on. And so, do we get any sound out of it now? Well, yeah, nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong with the speaker. Well, it couldn't have been the speaker only, could it? Because we didn't get anything out of that headphone jack. So if it's not that, then it must be something on here. So taking a quick look at the schematic, the audio is generated within this. It's passed through various bits and pieces to this amplifier, then from there out to the audio board where it's amplified again and sent out through the speakers or out through the headphone jack. We know there's nothing wrong with this, so the problem has to be on here. Hopefully the problem is not within this. If it is, that's game over. But I think the problem is in here, in this little amplifier. This is a UPC358 dual operational amplifier. And if we take a quick look with the scope, pin 3 is one of the audio inputs. This thing is stereo, so it's either the left or the right channel. I think it's the left channel. And that sort of looks like an audio signal to me. If I power cycle the machine, so that's it saying Sega, then it goes quiet, and then the game music starts. Pin 2, that's another input, but it just seems to be stuck at that level. And then pin 1 is an output, and equally it just seems to be stuck. But I think that is the noise that we're hearing. Same story on the other side. Pin 5 is that input again, and again that looks like an audio signal to me. Pin 6, that's the other input, and then pin 7 is the output, and again it just looks like noise. So I'm hoping that is the problem. Here's the thing though, where are we going to get a UPC358? Well, I could take the one out of here, but as I'm sure you know, I have plenty of scrap boards lying around. Here is a scrap board out of PlayStation 1, and while I have nothing to say that it works, there is a little amplifier here. Not exactly the same part number. This is an LM2904, but comparing the datasheets for the two, they seem identical. In fact, this part here might just be a later revision of that part. So let's pull that off there, stick it on there, and see if that solves our problem. And so does that get us our sound back? Genuine first try. Here we go. No. Damn it. Oh no, please don't be this. Game is running, isn't it? And yeah, it's running, but it's not making any noises. I went around and checked all those little vias, just on the off chance there was a break somewhere, but no, all of that is fine. There is a little bit of corrosion on that main chip there, just at that point, on a couple of those legs, just there. I wonder would it be worth reflowing that side of the chip. Well, reflowing that side of the ASIC here did nothing. Still no audio. So I decided to go and ask the experts over on the SMS Power forums. I asked the question, why am I not getting any audio out of this? And user by the name of Will Britton, well, he's been helping me, and we think the issue is the voltage level. There's a 2.5 volt bias that comes into the audio input on this amplifier. But as we've seen when we measured it earlier with the scope, the input levels onto this are closer to 5 volt. So there's something wrong with that 2.5 volt level. Now, it is generated up here between those two 10k resistors and this capacitor. So I decided to swap out that cap again. That's the one that came in the kit. I swapped it out to another one I had, just in the off chance that was faulty, but no, that hasn't made any difference. So this is one last roll of the dice here, because I did notice while swapping that out, there was quite a bit of crustiness around those two resistors. So I took them off, cleaned up the whole area. They're just back on there now, and I'm hoping our problems were down to bad connectivity. So just let me clean this up with the IPA and cotton buds, and then we'll give it another test. Alright, let's test it. Is that all it needed? A bit of a clean? Oh yes. Oh yes. It's working. We have audio. Fantastic. I was really starting to get worried there. There was something seriously wrong. And it just turned out to be a stupid connection up here. Bad solder joint or something, I don't know. But it's fixed. Fantastic. Well, I think we'll just draw the video to a close at that. Although I haven't put it back into its case yet, because we're not finished with it. We do have it up and running again, complete with sound. But the other thing that I think it could use is a new screen. Yeah, there's no damage on that screen. It does work fine, but let's be honest, it is a bit crap, isn't it? Compared to what you would expect these days. And so, in here, well, I went shopping and we have one new screen to fit. Now, you know me, I'm always looking for the best bargain available. So this screen came from AliExpress. Now, I have heard rather mixed reports about them, but we'll stick it into the system next time and see just how good or how bad it actually is. I do want to also have a quick look at this to see if there's anything we can do about it. I suspect the batteries in here will be absolutely toast, so they just need replaced. Although, if anyone has any ideas of a suitable replacement battery to put inside this, well, please let me know. But for now, that's it. The Game Gear is working again. We will come back to it next time to try out that other screen. So until then, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.